Father McFarland, the chaplain of the St. Joseph Businessmen's Association, has asked me to speak to you about the common good. So the subject of these conferences, and I'm sorry to tell you that there will be more than one conference, will be the common good. It's really impossible to take on a subject like this in just one conference. And that's why, as I will explain, I've asked Father McFarland if I can break it into two so that we can cover it in more, in the depth that it deserves. This is an important question. You'll see why. So the term common good may or may not be familiar to you, but it won't really matter. I've tried to structure the conference in such a way that we go very slowly and sort of step by step so that you understand a little bit the background of this notion. And I think the first question we have to ask is, where do we start? Where do we begin with this topic? In Lewis Carroll's book, Alice in Wonderland, you have a very funny scene between little Alice and a footman who's standing there. And Alice wants to get into a particular house, and the door is locked, and she doesn't know how she's going to get in. So she asks the footman, "How am I to get in?" "Are you to get in at all?" said the footman. That's the first question, you know. And it's a little clever trick of Lewis Carroll, but it's right. We very often start with this question, what is the common good? But we really have to ask a prior question. We have to ask, is there a common good? Is there such a thing as a common good? So just like the footman says, are you to get in at all? That's the first question. Does it exist, a common good? And I think here, just by way of introduction, we can say that just from our experience, it's fairly obvious that there does exist something that we would term a common good. And an easy example of this would be a soldier who gave his life in a battle. We praise this action of the soldier giving his life for his country. We praise that action as good, and not just from the point of view of the citizens who would benefit by his sacrifice. We actually say that for the soldier, the action is praiseworthy, and it's a better action than if he were to run away from the battle. It's better for him, for the soldier even, to give his life for his country than to run away. And another easy example we could take that shows that there is something called common good is a sports team. As the popular expression goes, there's no I in team. Why? Because the entire team has to work together to win the game. And if any one of those players stops working for the goal of the team, which is the victory, the win, and if that player starts looking only for his own glory, if he becomes sort of a ball hog, so to speak, in soccer or even in any other sport, then the entire team is suffering from that, and the entire team is hindered from achieving the victory. And so just as each player on the team contributes to the victory and contributes to the team, so each player enjoys a share in the victory, in the glory that comes from the victory. We could say that's kind of a common good there. It's a good that belongs to all, that belongs to the entire team. So it's clear to us that at least there does exist something. We mean something when we say this phrase, common good. And for now, all we intend by that phrase, all we understand by it, is a good that's shared, or a good of many people together, if we could say it that way. Again, the sports team, the victory that they're looking for is a good of the entire team together. It's the same good that they're looking for, and it belongs to all of them. So our next question then will be that first question that we had posed, what is the common good? Now that we've seen there is something we mean by that, we do mean something by that phrase, common good. Now we have to say, well, what is it? And it's important with this question, too, to notice a distinction that we're not asking, when we ask what is the common good, we're not asking for examples of the common good. We're not asking for more of these examples like the ones I have just given. If I ask you, what is virtue? It won't be an adequate response to start listing piety, courage, temperance, all of those. It won't be an adequate response to the question just to give examples or a big list. And so when we ask what is the common good, we're not asking for a big list of examples of the common good. We want to know, in fact, what it is. And we aren't asking either yet. That's later down the line, that question. We're not asking either what is the common good for this particular company or for this particular situation. That's a question that has to wait a little bit. We want to know, in general, most universally, what is the common good. And so our question here is in fact asking for the essence of the common good. We're asking for a real definition of the common good that will apply to all of these circumstances that we might see, to all of the examples that we could come up with. And just by way of keeping your attention during this conference, which I fear is a little bit heavy, but I'll try to make it as light as possible, is this kind of consideration even useful? This is sort of asking, why do we care about defining the common good? Why not stick to the examples? Well, it is useful because without a real understanding of the common good, we will easily get lost in the circumstances that surround our particular situations. And when we try to best determine how to act for the common good, if we're making mistakes about what the common good is in general, there's no way we can apply that ever to a particular circumstance. And to take another example of that, you're familiar with regimes in the world that are described as totalitarian, as where the good of the state is sort of looked at as an absolute, something that everyone has to work towards, even at the expense of the lives and of the citizens. And it's a terrible thing, of course, that we see in these totalitarian regimes. That kind of regime, though, begins with an error, and a basic error, on the understanding of the common good. We might say that, in fact, if we examine ourselves after listening to the conference, after going through it, if we examine ourselves, we might find we have made that very first error as well, that will eventually lead to a false thinking about the common good. So it's a very current topic for us. On the flip side of totalitarianism, we could say is a personalism that came to play very much in the church, even with Jacques Maritain, who championed this view of the common good. Personalism will say that every common good is ultimately ordered to the good of a particular person, the good of the individual as person. And we can see that as well in the church when we talk about ecumenism, something like that, where we are not willing to condemn an error because we are afraid of injuring a particular person. That's personalism. That's to order the common good to the good of the individual. And so these are big questions, in fact, that we're attacking here. And so it's important to look at this, not just on that theoretical level, but eventually with a view to coming down to the particulars. As we're going to see, the common good exists even in a smaller unit, even in, for example, the St. Joseph Businessmen's Association. That association has a common good, but we need to understand what we mean by that. There are a few difficulties involved in this investigation, and that's one of the reasons why this conference ended up being a little more hefty, perhaps, than I would have liked. It's very easy for us to come up with basic examples of the common good. And in fact, most people, if you just pulled someone over on the street and you asked him what's going on in a sports team, do you think that there's sort of a common thing that they're all fighting, that they're all working for there, or in an army that they're all fighting for? Most men would agree, yes, that seems like that's a good that they all have in common. But we are actually trying for a much more distinct, a more detailed knowledge of common good. And it's when we try to do that it's very easy for us to go astray. And as St. Thomas, citing Aristotle, says, a small error in the beginning a small misstep at the beginning, and eventually those paths widen and the error becomes very extreme, very grave, as in fact happens with a totalitarian regime. That begins with a very small error in the beginning about the common good, and it ends in how much sacrifice of human life, needless sacrifice. There's an added difficulty, though, if the stakes weren't already too much set against us. There's an added difficulty, and that is that whenever we discuss the good and the common good, we're touching on something that has an immediate bearing upon our choices and our actions. The good is always what we seek when we act. And so when we are considering the good and the common good, without our realizing it, our own desires are involved there. We can think that we are proceeding in a very objective way, and we're being influenced by our desires because we're talking about the good, which is what we go for. We always go for the good. And so if our desires are unformed or are disordered, then the entire inquiry risks being warped or falsified. And for the common good, a good example I can give of this is the expulsion of a student from a school. You can think about the difficulty of that decision for the one who is in charge of the school. If the one in charge of the school has too much of an affection, a natural affection for that student, that may influence his decision to keep the student there, whereas the common good would dictate that the student has to be removed from the school because of the damage he is causing there. So again, this can really very quickly touch something that's very personal for us, and therefore that involves our own desires. And so if our desires are unformed, or if our desires are disordered, then we risk making a mistake. And again, a small mistake in the beginning can lead to a very grave error in the end. So after that somewhat lengthy introduction to the topic, I hope I have tried to situate a little bit where we are, and also address a little bit the mode of investigation, which will be more a philosophical one, where we proceed step by step and try to see the matter with our mind. I just have to conclude then this introduction by describing where I'm going to begin and where I'm going to go. If we're talking about the common good, it's obvious that we're not going to know how to even begin to define it if we don't know what good is. The common good is going to be a type of good. It's going to be a division of the good. And so if we don't know what the good is, we are lost when we come to the common good. And so for this reason, this first conference has to do specifically with the good in general. And then, as we will see in the next time, we are going to address then directly the question of what is the common good. And just to explain as well this order, when we consider what the good is, we're going to try in general to give a definition of the good, and then we're going to try to give in general a division of the good. And you're going to see that that division leads to this term common good, and that's where I hope to reach in this conference. So there are plenty of interesting things already in our consideration of the good. I ask you to bear with me there, because although the conference has been entitled On the Common Good, we won't actually get to that until the next conference. We won't get that in detail until the next conference. So if we're going to ask what is the good, we have to know where we begin. As usual, what's the first question? Well, let's imagine for the moment that we call in a little child, and we ask this child, what's good? The child's responses are going to be fairly clear to everybody. The child won't have any hesitation in answering that. Candy. Candy's good. Pizza. Pizza's good. We can agree with him on that. Vacation's good. Bicycle's good. Sports are good. That's what the child will say. Many examples of good things, and that's a good way to begin, in fact. And it's obvious to us. Why would we begin with something that's not clear? We always have to begin with what's clear to us and then move from there. So what's good? Candy is good. That's an obvious answer. But if we want to get to a definition, obviously we're going to have to look at what's common between all of these things. Are all of the things that the child has just listed, are they all things that I can eat? No, can't eat a bicycle. I can't eat vacation. Are they all things that I can ride? No, again, I can't ride vacation. I can't ride candy. So what is common between them? And if we just a basic consideration there will get to us this point. They're all things that the child wants. They're all things that the child desires. And we can say that any answer we would give on that basic level, everything we would list are things we want. We want to play sports. We want to go on vacation. We want to eat candy. It's basic. And so we see that that's truly common to all of these answers. It's something wanted, something desired. And that's in fact where, believe it or not, the philosophers will begin, with the good. What is the good? It's what is desired, what is wanted. And we can see that. It's very clear to our mind. We begin with something very basic. We begin with something that's obvious, always. And so we can say that with Aristotle, following Aristotle, that the first definition of the good, by first we just mean the first thing we can say about it, is that it's something wanted. It's something that all want or desire. That's the definition. But we have to ask ourselves a question about this definition, and that, if you will, is the next step. So we've seen where we begin. We all agree about that. That's very easy for us to see. What's the next step? Well, let's ask this question about that definition, because it's curious. In that definition, you have good and wanting. The good is what all want. Well, we can ask a question there. Is it good because I want it? Or do I want it because it's good? It's a bit like if we were to ask, why are some actions called pious actions? Are they pious actions? Socrates actually asks this question. Are they pious actions because the gods like them? Or do the gods like them because they're pious? That's the question Socrates will pose. It's the same kind of question we want to know. Is the good first, or is our wanting it first? In other words, is this thing in front of me, the candy, is it good for me because I want it? Or do I want it because it's good for me? The question is essentially asking which is cause and which is effect. Is the good following from my desire as an effect? Or is my desire following from the good as an effect? Believe it or not, we can answer this pretty satisfactorily and fairly quickly. Consider a few desires that nature has given us. Hunger, thirst, tiredness. These are desires. Hunger for food, thirst for drink, tiredness for sleep. Let's ask a basic question now. We have a desire and a good. Food is a good. Everybody would agree on that. The desire for food is hunger. Which comes first, hunger or food? The way we want to ask this question is not which comes first in time. Obviously, I get hungry first and then I go for the food. But we want to ask, what does nature give me here first? Is food good for me because I have hunger? Or does nature give me hunger because food is something that's good for me? Again, I'll pose that question one more time because we can get confused in the ordering here. Does nature give me hunger in order to make food a good for me? Or do I have this hunger because food is a good for me and I need it? Believe it or not, the answer there is very simple. Obviously, hunger is given to me by nature because the food is good, and the hunger drives me to get that, what's good for me. Imagine a sick man in a hospital. He's lost his appetite. Does that mean the food ceases to be necessary to him? If he doesn't eat, he will die. And so that's why in a hospital, even when you lose your appetite, you have to eat something to survive. The food is good for you, whether you have the hunger or not, whether you have the desire or not. Take it again with thirst. You might not be thirsty, and yet it's very good for you to drink water, and a lot of water, for example. So we see there the desire for the drink is something that comes after. It's the goodness of the thing that is first. The food is good for me whether I desire it or not. The water is good for me whether I desire it or not. And so again, which is cause, which is effect? We see clearly in these examples that the cause is the good in the thing. I desire it because it's good. It doesn't gain its goodness because of my desire. Think again about that example. The food is going to be good for me whether I have hunger or not. I need to eat, no matter whether I've got an appetite or not. So my hunger is coming after. It's coming from the goodness in the thing because the food is good for me. If you can think for a minute about how far-reaching this very, very basic conclusion about the good is, how many people in today's world actually ask this question, or do they just assume, I want that, therefore it's good for me? And as we see, no, very many times it's not. You want the third piece of cake. Does that mean it's good for you? Nope. You might get sick, in fact, from eating the third piece of cake, but you wanted it. It doesn't make it good for you. We can see that. It's very obvious. But if this is a truly universal conclusion that applies to everything, how many people will take out so much money, will be in so much debt because they want all of these things, therefore they're good for me? No, they're not good. So our first definition of the good, when we say the good is what all desire, the good is what all want, that's a definition through the effect. We're looking at the effect of the good, which is to make me desire something. So let's draw some conclusions from this basic consideration here, if you're still with me. We have a few conclusions, very far-reaching conclusions, that will assist us in our consideration of the common good. First of all, then, when we desire something, what we desire is not something that's additional, some additional quality of a thing, but the thing itself. If a thirsty man wants water, desires water, he doesn't desire the water for some additional thing that the water has. He wants the water. It's the water that's good for him. In other words, we could say it would be strange to say we desire the goodness of water, but not the water itself. It's obvious. We desire the water itself. That's what we want. That's what's good for me. That's what's going to quench the thirst. That's what's going to help me. So when we call a thing good, then, we can say from our first basic definition even, we don't signify an additional quality that the thing has. We signify the thing itself. It's the thing that is good. The water is good for me. And that's the first step, if you will, to seeing that the good is not based on me. The good is based on something outside of me. The good is something in reality, in things. Once again, as we said, it does not depend on my desire. The good is in something. The good is objective, if you want to use the term in that way. Secondly, we can say to complete this understanding, because our desire arises from the goodness of the thing, and not the other way around, it's not because I want something that it becomes good for me. It will be good for me or not based on something else, not my desire for it. Because of that, then, we can say that the good really is something objective. It really is something that's not dependent upon us. Once again, observe how far-reaching that has as a consequence. In modern science, they're accustomed to exclude any consideration of what they would call values. In biology, for example, but modern biology will not consider abortion as an evil or as a good. It's just going to abstract from that completely. Why? Because they say, well, that's values. When you talk good, bad, that depends on your opinion. That depends on what you think. That depends on what you want for you. We're science. We're about facts. We're about reality. That's not reality. Whether this thing is good or not is just your judgment. That's a value you have. You were raised with that value. That's fine. Somebody else was raised without it. That's not a fact. It's not reality. On the contrary, we're saying, and we said it very quickly with very few steps in between, no, the good is in the thing. It's in reality. To say whether something is good or bad is a question of an objective truth, therefore. It's something that we cannot change based on how we are raised, what values we have, or whatever. It just doesn't change based on that. So that's a very far-reaching conclusion that we've gotten in very few steps. So once again, just to recap before we move on to divide the good, consider that where we started. We asked the child, what's good? Candy, beer, not the child, but you, beer, sports, vacation, right? All of those are answers that we could say. We asked what's common between them. Well, they're all desired. They're all wanted. And then we asked, well, does that wanting come from the thing being good first? Or is the thing good because I want it? And we have to say, we're forced to say, based on obvious things, that no, it's the wanting, the desire, comes from the goodness of the thing. It's not our desire that causes the goodness. And then we concluded from that despite the great variety that we find in the desires of men and the desires of people that are here, that are around, any true understanding of the good has to conclude that the good is in reality, is in things. Because once again, it doesn't depend on my desires. It doesn't depend on what I want or don't want. So that's our first conclusion, if you will. The good is real, objective, true, if you want to use those terms. The next thing that we have to conclude about the good, and the next point that will come up later, is we have to see the good as what we're going to call an end or a purpose for our actions. Take a basic example. We'll go to our level because it's a little clearer. If I go to the store to buy a bottle of scotch so that I can drink some of it, then what's going on here? Well, what drives me to go to the store, the motive that I have, the purpose that I have for going to the store, is the goodness that I find in the scotch. My goal is to drink the scotch, and so I do all these other actions. I get the keys, I go to the car, I turn the car on, I drive the car, I pay the cashier, I take the bottle back home. All of those actions that I do in order to get to that goodness, in order to get to the good that is there in the thing. And so we can say that in that case, the scotch is that for the sake of which I am acting. In other words, it's the purpose of my actions. It's the end. It's the goal. What's the goal? It's the goodness, right? The good thing. And so it's that for the sake of which, insofar as it's something I want for me. I want it. So what we're saying is that whenever we talk about the good, in general, just by the very fact that we're talking about a wanting, a desire here, the good has that notion of being that for the sake of which. It has the notion of being an end or a purpose of my actions. And note how our first definition of the good brought out this truth. We said that the good is what all want. That's where we started, the first definition. That is to say, the good is what everyone orders his actions towards, as an end, as a goal, as a purpose. Why do you do anything that you do? It's for a good. It's for something good. That's obvious. And so the good is the reason for all. It's for all the reason for acting. So the good has that notion of an end or a purpose of action. That's going to come up in a minute that we need to see. So once again, our second conclusion here is the good is an end. The good is a purpose of action, and that's going to come about. All right, let's try to descend a little more into the practical. We've been floating in the clouds a bit theoretical. Well, now that we have a definition of the good, at least a working definition and a couple of conclusions, can we divide the good? Is there one good? Are there many goods? Do they have some sort of, can we collect them all into different classifications or something like that? That's the next logical step. Before we look at that, let's just consider for the moment, though, what's a proper division of something? If I ask you to give me a division of sports cars, and you start saying, well, some are red, some are yellow, some are black, I'm going to say, wait, that's a bad division. Why is it a bad division? Why is it an improper division? Well, because the same car, the same make of car, could be many different colors. So by telling me the different colors of cars, you're not telling me anything about sports cars, right? I already know that. That's something that doesn't pertain to the sports cars. But if you started by dividing according to, let's say, make and model, something like that, that would be a good division, at least a better division, because it starts to tell me something about the sports cars. So the different companies like the Lamborghinis, the Ferraris, they each have their own way of making the sports cars. And so by telling me, well, some are Ferraris, some are Lamborghinis, you tell me something about sports cars. But telling me just colors is not, it's just an accidental thing. That's what we would call something that doesn't, an accidental division. It doesn't tell me anything about what I'm talking about. So by contrast, a proper division, as we were just saying, a division that's good is going to get at what the thing is in itself. It's going to teach us something more about that thing. So for example, a camera is a tool to record pictures. A proper division of cameras then would be to look at maybe the means by which the cameras record the pictures. Some film, some digital. Among those that are digital, some have mirrors, some don't have mirrors, some have two sensors, etc. You get the idea. So there you're dividing the cameras according to what they really are. And in turn, it tells me something about the cameras. It tells me something more. I go a little deeper into the matter. And so if we want, then we can call that an essential division. It's a division that gets at the essence of the thing, that gets at what the thing is in itself. How are we going to give then an essential division of the good? And that division should take us one step further to understanding the good. Well, we have to refer again to the definition. The good is what all desire. So if we consider this definition, we can see that any proper division of the good is going to attack it on that score, the question of desire, the question of wanting. Right? That's fundamental to the good, as we saw. And so we can follow St. Thomas in this. If we consider that definition, we can give as the very first and most fundamental division of the good the following division into three, and I'll try to explain them. The first would be useful, the useful good. Well, the useful goods are those that I desire for something else. I use them for something. Classic example would be money. I want money so that I can do stuff with it. I don't want money just to sit on it, or just to hold it in the bank or put it under the mattress. I want money so I can spend it, so I can get something else. That's a useful good. I'm desiring that thing for the sake of something else. Or once again, medicine. Why do I want medicine? Certainly not for its flavor. Certainly not for the taste that the cough medicine has in itself. I want it for something else. In this case, health, to get back my health. The second item in this division is the pleasant good. Well, what's going on there? I no longer want this thing for the sake of something else. I want it because it gives me some pleasure. Because it pleases me to have it. For example, the glass of scotch. The glass of scotch is a pleasant good. Why do I want that? Well, not necessarily going for health. I drink it when I'm healthy too. I don't drink the medicine when I'm healthy. I drink the scotch when I'm healthy too because it's pleasant. I don't drink it for any other reason. I don't drink it to try to look sophisticated or anything. Just because it's healthy. Not because it's healthy, excuse me, because it's pleasant. And the third we could say then is what St. Thomas will call the honorable good. This is a good which I desire for no other reason than itself. We have to take a moment to convince ourselves that there is such a thing. It's not because it brings me pleasure necessarily. It's not because I'm going to use it for something else. I desire it because just for what it is. An example of that might be, in fact, honor or glory. Sometimes to get glory, it's not going to be pleasant. You're going to have to, as a soldier, charge the embankment or whatever. You're going to have to submit to some wounds to get the Purple Heart, for example. That's the glory. And nevertheless, people desire that. They desire the glory. Why? For no other reason than that it's glory, that's good. And so this is the honorable good. So that division into three once more was the useful good, what I want for the sake of something else. The pleasant good, what I want because it's pleasing to me. And finally, the honorable good, what I desire for no other reason than itself. It is good. And note here that in this division, it's not the goods themselves that are opposed. Nothing prevents the same thing from being all three. It could be that the glory is pleasant to attain. It could be that the glory helps you get a promotion after that. It could be. We're not dividing based on that. We're dividing based on, once again, the reasons for which we desire it. And so that's where the opposition is. The same thing I will not desire both because it's pleasant and because it's useful. One or the other is going to dominate. Right? The Scotch, for example, some some people will drink scotch because it's both pleasant and useful. It helps kill the bacteria or whatever. But one will dominate. So if we understand that division into the first, most fundamental division, based on, again, the reasons for which we desire something, into the useful, the pleasant, and the honorable, now we want to ask, and now we're getting a little more interesting, I'd like to say, is there an order among them? Is one or the other better? Is the honorable better than the pleasant? Is the useful better than the pleasant or the honorable? And you're going to see it's pretty obvious. Everybody's got an opinion on this, even if they don't use the terms honorable good, honorable good, pleasant good, useful good. Even if they don't use those terms, they have an opinion. Some consider the best good to be found among the useful goods, money. You have the people that will never get enough money. They will always collect more and more money. And we can say that in a way they say that's the best good, right? They do everything for money. They're going to sacrifice their honor for money. They're going to sacrifice their pleasure, spend long hours working, that kind of thing. For what? Money, a useful good. Some are going to say it's a useful good, that's the best. Others are going to say that the chief good is among the pleasant. Those are the ones that seek the life of pleasure. They're willing to sacrifice everything else for the sake of some pleasure. They're willing to spend all of their money for a pleasant evening. They're willing to, again, sacrifice their honor or their glory for a pleasure. And then a few, very few, I hope we're among them, have held that the best good is found among the honorable goods, such as would be virtue or honor or renown. You notice there you can still go wrong. You can still say the honorable goods are the best, but after that if you say it's glory, that might not be right. So since we're not talking about, since this isn't a treatise on human happiness, although I know it sounds like one, we're not going to delve into this question of which good precisely is the best. But we do want to see that everybody's got an opinion about which of these goods in the division is the best. And so we want to see a little bit, is there an order among them? Can we at least draw a distinction and say, yes, the best good is going to be found among the pleasant goods, or the best good is going to be found among the honorable goods. Can we at least do that? And again, I think we can, and it will be important actually for our consideration of the common good. In fact, just as a mid-proviso about all of this does bear upon the common good. We're not just going through this because I like talking philosophy. Well, I do like talking philosophy. But we're going through it because it does bear, and we have to make these distinctions. Otherwise, again, we will not understand the common good. A small error in the beginning, we are very far off the track in the end. So, can we draw some sort of order? Yes, we can. First of all, we have to award the third place medal. The bronze medal goes to the useful goods. They are, if you were to look at it that way, the worst goods. That's a silly way to say it, though. We would say they come in third place among the three types of goods. Why is that the case? Because by their very definition, the useful good are for the sake of something else. And we said that the good is an end. The good is that for the sake of which? To take an example, again, the useful goods are good because of some other good, not because of themselves. The money, for example, is not good in itself. I'll throw you on an island with a stack of money. Good luck, right? The money is not good in itself. You can't eat it, right? You can't use it to sustain you. You have the money so that you can buy something, so that you can do something else. So the very reason the useful goods are considered to be good is not because of themselves, but because of something else. And so they have no business among the other two. They are not as high as the other two. What's pleasant you will try to go for just because it's pleasant, because of itself in some way. And of course, as we saw, what's honorable you do just because it's good, not for the sake of something else. So again, the useful goods, they come in third because they receive their goodness from something else. So they can't be first. Now the big question, pleasant or honorable? Which are higher? Again, some will say it's the pleasant that are higher. Because, again, the life of pleasure appeals to them there. And they don't want to go after virtue or whatever. Well, we can say we grant the second place medal to the pleasant goods, of course. Why, though? We have to see the reason, and that's the beautiful thing about this. We can see a very basic, a very simple reason for this, that the pleasant goods are second, they're coming in second to the honorable goods. Well, let's look at those that hold that the chief good is among the pleasant. Well, they're going to have a hard time, they're going to have a very hard time giving any reason, any intrinsic reason, for one or the other pleasant thing to be the best. Think about that for a minute. If we surveyed the people in this room, what do you say, what's the most pleasurable thing? What's the best thing in terms of the pleasure? Let's just take it with regard to drinks. Some have one preference, some have another preference. Some people just don't like scotch. And is there any intrinsic reason that they can give for that? Remember, the good is in things. It's in reality. Can they argue, well, you see, because of the molecular structure of scotch, it's actually the best drink that you can have. It's the most pleasurable for you. No, some don't like it. Some don't have the taste. They can't give a scientific argument of what's in the thing, the molecular structure, or whatever. And so there again, then, why are we going to call some pleasant goods good or better than others? Because of something outside. Because of something that doesn't pertain to the pleasure there. For example, if we're talking about eating meat, we could say the eating is something, a pleasant good. The meat is a pleasant good. Well, are we going to say then it's good all the time? Because you like it, right? You like it, so it's good all the time. No. If it's a Friday in Lent, it's not good. And not because the meat has changed in any way, right? You see that the goodness there, the pleasure there, is subordinate to the thing itself and subordinate to the circumstances that surround it. So once again, the pleasant there, the pleasurable goods, the pleasant goods, there's no reason in themselves for being good or bad. The goodness or the badness of them is going to be judged based on something else. And so in fact, we can't say that they are good because of themselves. Remember, that's how we argued against the useful goods. They receive their goodness from something else. The pleasant things, in a way, receive their goodness from something else. If the circumstances are right, the meat is good for you. If the circumstances are wrong, it's not good for you. So the pleasurable goods are receiving their goodness from something else. And therefore, we have to say, again, they're not good in that perfect sense of good, in that highest sense of good. And so it remains then that the honorable goods are the best goods. That is to say that they are most truly good in and of themselves. Look for a minute back at the definition. We always go back to that because it's the most basic thing we can see. If the good is what all desire, and we say that the desire flows from the goodness of the thing, then it's clear that the best good is going to lie among those things that I desire for no other reason than the thing itself. I'll say that one more time. If the good is what all desire, then it's clear that the best good has to be among that class of things that I want just because of what it is, and not because of something else. And that it is good for me because of what it is, and not because of the circumstances, not dependent upon anything else. And so if you want to take that down to something very specific, the virtue will always be good. Virtue doesn't just become bad because of circumstances, right? It's always good. And it's always desired for itself. It's never desired for the sake of something else, first of all, I would say. Obviously, we can desire virtue in order to go to heaven. That's fine. We're just talking about an order among honorable goods there. So once again, this division that we had into the useful, the pleasant, and the honorable, there is an order among those goods. Some are better than others. The class of honorable goods are the best, followed by the pleasant, followed by the useful. And this is going to have a great bearing upon things, in fact, when we get into the common good specifically. That is the first and most fundamental division that we can make of the good. The second division, and now, again, we're beginning to touch, finally, we've made it after, 50 minutes. We've made it to the common good. The second division is going to be precisely that. private versus common. Before we get into it, though, because there are a lot of pitfalls here and some distinctions we're going to have to make, let's look first of all at why this is the next division. Remember, we talked about the cameras, and we talked about, well, you could divide them perhaps based on how they're taking the photograph. Well, if you want to know what the next division of cameras is, you're going to have to look again at the cameras, and you're going to have to see why would another division based on, for example, megapixels or I don't know what, why would that be appropriate? So why is this? Why would we now say the next division is into private versus common? We're going to say what we mean by that, but why does that even come up as a division? And the answer is, again, going back to now we're looking at the good as an end. Remember, I said that the good is a purpose for our actions. It's an end of our actions. It's something we do our actions for. We order our actions to that. So we're looking at this good as an end. We already looked at the reasons for which we desire the things. We might desire it because it's useful to us. We might desire it because it's pleasant. Or we might desire it just because it is what it is. Now we're going to look at the good specifically as an end. And we can see there that there are two things going on whenever we have an end or a purpose of our actions. There is the thing that we want on the one hand, and there is the one we want it for on the other hand. If we ask the doctor who's in the hospital working on healing the patient, we ask him, why are you moving your hands like that? He would say, well, it's for the sake of the health of the patient. I'm trying to attain the health of the patient. I'm trying to heal the patient. That would be what we talk about as the good, as what he's trying to achieve. And we say, well, why are you doing that? Are you doing that for me? You say, no, I'm doing it for the patient, right? That's the other side of the good as end. Why does he act? What is he doing that for the sake of? It's for the sake of the patient. Both of them are valid answers. If we went into the doctor, we say, why are you moving your hands like that? It's for the sake of the patient. Or he could say, it's for the sake of the health of the patient. So there's two sides, if you will, of the same coin. We talk about the good as an end. We have what it is that we're going after, what it is that we're actually seeking to achieve, and the one for whom we're seeking to achieve that. Once again, go back to your glass of scotch. What is the good you are achieving there? The goodness that you're getting at is the scotch. For whom are you drinking that? You. Obvious. So that second division is going to look at that. For whom is it good? For whom is that good being attained? And so it's clear there that we can have a good, we might have a good that on the one hand we attain just for ourselves. If there's one glass of scotch here between you and me, only one of us can have it, right? It's either mine or it's yours. That's what we would call a private good, because we both are looking at the goodness of the scotch, right? We're both looking at that same end. But finally, for whom will that scotch be good? Either you or me, not both, right? So that would be what we say is, on the one hand, a private good. It's one person's and one person's alone, and that's it. It stops there. And of course, that's many examples. Food is the easiest thing to see. Only one of us can eat this apple, for example. That would be what we call a private good. Well, on the other hand, we have what's a common good. And go back then to our easy examples of the common good. The sports team. If the goalie comes on the soccer team and he says, the victory is mine and not yours, he would be lying, right? We would say that's wrong. Why? The other men have scored goals. He's not scored the goals. It's because of the goals that they won. But if the other member of the team, if the striker, for example, the forward, says to the goalie, the victory is mine and not yours, that would be false too, because the goalie blocked the shots, right? That stopped the other team from winning, that stopped the other team from surpassing them. So the victory that they're looking at there, the win in the sports team, it belongs to both. It's good for both. They share that good. Both of them have worked towards the same good, victory against this team. And on the other hand, who is it good for? For whom is it good? It's good for all the members of the team. Notice the distinction there. The scotch can only be good for one of us, because only one of us can actually consume it. The victory can be good for the entire team. And now we begin to see, sort of shimmering in the distance, maybe a little foggy at start, what we mean by a common good. It's a good yes, that's an end. That's something we order our actions towards. The entire sports team fights for the same goal, victory. For whom is that victory good? The entire team. It's the good of each one of the members of the team. Unlike, again, the apple or the scotch, which it can only be good for one person. So if we understand that that's a next division of the good between the private and the common, we are ready, I would say, to begin the look at the common good. We're going to have to start, and this I will leave to next conference. We're going to have to start by making some clear distinctions, because when we say common, we say, yes, it's the good of all of them, but what do we mean by common? Once again, I mentioned that example of a totalitarian regime. The totalitarian regime will say that the common good is in fact the good of the state, but not the good of the citizens. Every evil in a totalitarian regime, every evil done to the citizens is permitted if it's good for the state. If somehow because of that the state survives. So there's something twisted there. They make the common good an alien good, something that's not the good of the people there. It's as if we were to somehow divorce the victory from the members of the team, and only the owner of the team said, it's my victory, you had nothing to do with it. Right? There's a problem there. On the other hand, a personalism, a look at a personalist view of things would say the entire state, the entire city, or an entire organization is ordered to my good. And therefore, again, take it right to the heart of the matter there. Vatican II. The church can no longer condemn error because the church is for souls, and condemning error is going to upset some souls. Look at what you've done. You've ordered the common good to the individual private good of the person. That's personalism in a certain sense. And so, once again, we have to be very clear and careful when we're talking about the common here. I'll pose to you another objection that we're not going to answer right now, but we're going to answer later in the second conference, but it should already get you thinking. The question is whether your beatitude, your eternal beatitude, is a common good or a private good. Is it something that belongs only to you, or does it belong to many? I specifically posed the question in a confusing way, because as you see, that's a trick way of posing the question. But right now, it certainly looks like it's a private good. I'm the only one, if I get to heaven, right, I'm the only one seeing God as far as I'm concerned, right? The other people might get to heaven, but it's themselves that get themselves to heaven. So I'm there, I'm seeing God, that's a good for me. And my vision of God is not shared by the other ones. It's my vision, right? It's me that has to see it. So it looks very much like a private good. Nobody can really get in on that, right? I can't sneak someone into heaven and say, it's okay, you can share, we'll both look, right? No, he's got to get in on his own merits. He's got to get in and have his own vision of God. He's got to have grace in his soul. So, but there's a question, isn't it? If beatitude, if eternal beatitude, the final goal of all of your actions in life is a private good, then can't you do anything right now? Can't you do anything in any society for the sake of that? Shouldn't the state be ordered to that? Shouldn't the church be ordered to that? How could the church ever excommunicate someone if that's the case? When the church excommunicates someone, that person is now excluded specifically from the beatific vision. But if that beatific vision, the private good, is the ultimate goal of everything that everybody does, and the church, we're talking about a common good there, we're talking about a society. If the church then is ordered to that, the church could never excommunicate because the church would be going against its end. It's a difficulty. Maybe you don't see it fully yet, but we can talk about it more in the next conference. We're going to have to see how even the beatific vision, even that final goal of all of human life, as we say by our faith, is a common good. And that's going to be understanding that word common properly. So that's the first thing that we'll begin with next time. I bring up one other point just to conclude the conference. I think it's important for us in these questions to make a clear distinction between what I might call our first thoughts and our second thoughts. Everybody in every time, more or less, has admitted that God, something like God, exists. This great theoretical question about the existence of God, it's one of the arguments, in fact, we use. We say, in apologetics, we use that. We say, look, every people at every time has had some notion of a deity. That's what I would call a first thought. The first thoughts that we have, the very first things that we can see, are usually, generally, true. They're usually good. Even look at the immortality of the soul, another big apologetical question. Pretty much all men at all times have affirmed that the soul continues to exist after the body dies. It's an argument, again, we use in apologetics. That's a first thought that we have. It's sort of our first contact with the truth. And we see that that's normal because, once again, our intellect, our mind, is ordered to the truth. So it's going to get something right. And it usually gets that first step right, that first thought right. The problem is when you get to the second thoughts, because that's something very vague and general to say, God exists, the soul is immortal. Those are vague and general statements. When we start to delve down into the question, when we start to make the question more and more precise, make the answer more and more detailed, when we take second, third, fourth steps, that's often where we go wrong. And so you get a monotheism that corrupts into a polytheism, that corrupts finally into attributing human follies, human emotions to the gods, until finally the gods become more diabolical than divine, right? More diabolical than holy, we might say. And we see that. The Aztec religion, they believed in God. That's a first thought. But how do you get to human sacrifice? They make a small error in a second thought, and at the end, they're very far from the truth. So once again, we can say with the common good, it's the same thing, and with the good in general. There's a difference between first thoughts and second thoughts. What we've dealt with here, so to speak, mostly our first thoughts. We're going to be generally right. Most men say, yeah, the good is what you want. Some of them say, well, it's good because you want it. That's a second thought where they go wrong. So I bring up that division again, that distinction, in order to say we have to step carefully here. It would be a mistake in attacking a question of this magnitude that has such ramifications for our life. It would be a mistake to just rush into the question. So that's by way of an apology, an apologetics for this conference. So we will end there. The next time I will pick up again with that second division of the private versus the common, and we're going to have to see what we mean by common. So thank you very much for your attention. Okay, so are there any questions? Yes, Mr. Richardson.
Will you be drawing distinctions between real goods and perceived goods that may not be good?
Yes, that's a good question. So once again, the question was, will we be drawing distinctions between real goods and perceived goods? We will certainly be doing that a little bit more in the next conference. We've noticed, though, we've already set the stage for that by saying that the good is in things and not in our desires. We've already made that initial distinction. So we've already seen that you can desire something and it might not be good for you. Right? So it's the basis of that distinction. If we wanted to go further, we could say that there's going to be a dependence there upon our knowledge. If I ask you, do you want some caviar right now? If you've never had caviar, you're not going to desire it, right? You're not going to want it. So you're going to have to know about caviar first. And so that's going to be an explanation, a partial explanation of why a thing can appear good and not be actually good. Just to illustrate that very briefly, there was a story in France of some men were collecting mushrooms. And there's a very rare kind of mushroom that's a delicacy. And so a couple of just guys, they went out and they found these mushrooms, so they collected them, and they tried to sell them to the restaurants because they can get a pretty penny for them. And about a few of the restaurants at first just were refusing them. Said, no, I don't think so. Finally, one of the restaurants bought them, and a week later, somebody who ate there died because the mushroom was actually poisonous. And normally the restaurants they have an expert to look at the mushrooms because it's very close to the rare mushroom, but it's actually poisonous for you. So what happened there? The people in the restaurant, the customers, they wanted those mushrooms. They desired that good, but it wasn't actually good for them. Why? Because they made an error in their knowledge, right? They didn't know enough to distinguish there. And so you can see already there the distinction between the apparent good and the real good. And there they hold it to be good for them, but they're wrong. And in that case, it's an error in knowledge. You can also have an error, once again, in if your desires are twisted. If you have a bad habit of every time you pass the cupboard, you eat some cookies, right? You might eat too many cookies one day. That's not actually good for you. It appears good for you. And there your error is not in your knowledge. You know very well that eating 20 Oreo cookies in the course of an afternoon is going to make you sick. You know that. But your knowledge there is being dragged behind your passions or your emotions.